Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our event on sustainable food systems in New York City. I'm Dani Nierenberg. I'm the president and co-founder with Bernie Pollock of Food Tank and a proud scholar in residence at the Steinhardt School at NYU for this year, which is an incredible honor. I'm really excited about tonight's event to explore how New York City is working to create more sustainable food systems. And it's my honor to be partnering with the Steinhardt School and Professor Beth Weissman and her colleagues, including Professor Jennifer Berg. Beth, thank you for collaborating with Food Tank on this event. It's such a pleasure to see you. And I'm hoping you can introduce yourself and say a few words.
Delighted. Thank you, Dani. I'm Beth Weissman, Chair of the Department of Nutrition and Food Studies at NYU Steinhardt School of Education, Culture, and Human Development. I really am delighted to welcome you to this evening's conversation. Our department is thrilled to have such a thoughtful and engaged set of panelists. And most especially, we're happy to have you, Dani, President of Food Tank, Steinhardt Scholar in Residence, to launch tonight's conversation. I also want to take just a moment to extend special thanks to the entire Food Tank team. You have such an incredible group, most especially Bernie Pollock and our alum, Elena Seeley, for all the work they've put into bringing this evening to fruition. I'm a lifelong New Yorker, and as a lifelong New Yorker, I have seen this city, our city, come back from some terribly difficult times. But this moment, as we continue to deal with the economic, social, and health impacts of a devastating pandemic, and we try to heed demands to address deeply entrenched elements of racial injustice, and we face, of course, the existential threat of climate change. It's sometimes hard to be optimistic, but that doesn't allow us to look away. And so, as they say, and I keep repeating to myself, think globally, act locally. And I think that's exactly what this evening is intended to do. Bring us some solutions right here in New York that maybe will be a beacon for other places throughout the world. So with that, Dani, I leave this in your able hands. I look forward to hearing the conversation.
Thanks so much, Beth, and I'm glad you're focusing on optimism and hope. That's what I really want to, hope that we take away from this conversation. But now I get to the fun part. I get to chat with some of the most influential change makers in food and agriculture in New York City. People who don't just talk about changing our food systems for the better, but who are actually doing the work to create more just, equal, nourishing, accessible, affordable, and environmentally sustainable food and agriculture systems in the city. So let me introduce them all briefly, and of course you can find out more about them online. First, we have Keith Carr, the Senior Policy and Government Relations Manager for City Harvest, one of my very favorite organizations working to help recover food that would otherwise go to waste and make sure it gets to people in need. Keith is a superhero from my perspective. So thanks for being here, Keith.
Thank you. Really happy to be here.
Great, thank you. Next, we are joined by Kate MacKenzie, who is the director for the Mayor's Office on Food Policy. And it's such an exciting time for Kate and all of her colleagues to be involved in food policy in the city with the recent election and inauguration of Mayor Eric Adams, who is what Food Tank likes to call America's Food Mayor. So great to have you as part of this event, Kate.
Thanks so much.
I'm also excited to introduce Naama Tamir, the co-owner of Lighthouse Restaurant. And this is a restaurant that is really a lighthouse, serving as an advocate for composting and recycling and their commitment to local, sustainable, and fair food systems. Naama, I'm so excited to hear your thoughts tonight. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And last but not least, we have someone I've admired for a very long time and is a veteran of many food tanks, many of our food tanks events, because of his expertise and dedication to making sure that farmers and eaters are really and truly connected in New York City. Marcel van Ooyen is the president and CEO of GrowNYC. So really honored again to have you with us, Marcel. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Thank you, Beth. Thanks, Dani. Other panelists, looking forward to a great discussion.
It is going to be a great discussion. I want to thank everyone for being here. It's incredibly exciting to me to have so many great minds together, and I'm excited to talk to all of you. And I want to thank our online audience as well. You can use the Q&A function to ask questions, and I'll do my best to integrate them into our conversation. And you can also use the hashtag food tank to share your thoughts with us online. So I have a few ground rules, and I really hope that this can be a discussion, a conversation among all of us around some of the obstacles, of course, that you face in your work, but more importantly, as Beth mentioned mentioned before, the successes, the hope, the inspiration you have for other organizations and for other cities across the country who are facing similar challenges. So with that, Keith, if you don't mind, I'd like to start with you. So both Hurricane Sandy and the pandemic have made it clear that our current emergency food donation models are not sustainable, and that our current methods of food charity are not sustainable really over the long term. And I'm wondering if you can talk about what City Harvest has seen over the last 2 years, and why it's important to professionalize these support systems. There's been so much reliance on volunteers and retirees. How can we professionalize and really advance food charity so that it, when we experience other global shocks, that there's systems in place?
Well, to really sort of phrase, I like the way you phrased it, but to really sort of provide more context, I'd have to go back further than 2 years. When I first started with City Harvest, which was 11 years ago, we were struggling to rescue and deliver about 21 million pounds of food. And there was like a big push for our 30th anniversary to get to 30 million pounds. Kate probably remembers that. And so, but and what we've seen is just like a steady increase for the need for emergency food, whether it's a gray economy or high unemployment, low unemployment, like the need for food, the need for emergency food has just continued to increase. So the right before the pandemic, we had sort of set a goal to rescue and deliver about 65 million pounds of food. And over the last 2 years, the years of COVID, from 2020 to 2020 or late 2021, we ended up doing more than 200 million pounds, which is ridiculous. I mean, we were totally stretched and we pivoted, and a lot of great things happened with support from our funders as well as from government and everything. But it really just showed how broken the system is, and that, I mean, that it's really not about fighting hunger. If we're not fighting to end food insecurity, the fight for hunger is never going to end, because they're sort of in the same family. But food insecurity, if you're not talking about really looking at the causes of it, food insecurity and hunger, the systemic injustices, racial injustices that feed into it, then it's really not going to change. So we're really excited that my team, the policy and government team, we've put together our new policy priorities for the organization, and really looking at it, everything from a lens of racial equity and looking at the systemic injustices. So a lot of the policies that we advocate for are really along those lines. And it also shows that the charitable model to this, it's just not working. It's just not working. Like, we should not be paid to do what the government should do. And so some good things, like I said, came out of I hate to say good things came out of the pandemic, but for the city to really look at creative and innovative ways to deliver food to people that need it, looking at our seniors, looking at our schools, realizing that the schools provide such an integral part into feeding families. It's not just lunch. I mean, the schools are providing like 2 of the 3 meals that students get throughout the day, and the economic impact that has on a family to really provide for themselves. We did a self-sufficiency standard study with United Way and a couple of other organizations, the Women's Center for Career Advancement as well. And it showed that, I mean, the federal guidelines for poverty are ridiculous. And it really shows that for a family of 3 in New York City, for them to pay their rent, car fare to go to school, wash their clothes, do everything that they need, and then put food on the table, because we all know once money gets short, food is the first thing that gets taken out of the budget. But for them to thrive and just survive in a city that's being over gentrified. Food is more expensive. Your grocery store that used to be affordable, or that at least give you some credit until the end of the month or the first of the month, that no longer exists. Now you have to take a car service to your grocery store. Your laundromat is gone because that's now a luxury high rise. All these things play into why families can't afford food. So our self-sufficiency standard study really showed that it's about $70,000 for a family of 3 just to feed themselves in New York City.
Wow.
Yeah.
Incredible. You said some really interesting things. One, I just want to repeat, is that we need people to thrive, not just survive. And I think that's an important part of what we want to discuss tonight. And Keith, I want to come back to you in a little while about the policies that is creating to address some of the systemic injustices, the racial inequity that New York and so many other cities are grappling with, and how to solve some of these issues. But Naama, I want to turn to you, and as Keith said, the pandemic has been really hard on the food charity model, but it's been especially hard on restaurants. And thank goodness that Lighthouse has been able to survive and thrive during this time. But I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about why your model, the Lighthouse model, has been able to survive these last 2 years.
Well, I think Lighthouse thrives in a localized system. One of the issues that I see in this problematic time that we're in right now is that we really transitioned from very resilient local system to this global market. And so, the pandemic exactly showed how that transition is making our communities and our food systems very fragile. Mm-hmm. By working with a local community, building a community, having a staff that is treated well, that eats well, having people that are connected to our mission statement, we really did manage to build something that in a tough time can stand up and stick around and be there for other people. And people showed up for us in a major way. And it's just, we're not buying things from abroad. We're constantly working with local farmers. And so that system was just more available to us. And just all of the practices, we were still working with some reusables, and just everything that we had worked on in the last 11 years proved to just stand the test of these times.
Absolutely. And do you think that as restaurants figure out how to restructure themselves, I mean, the Independent Restaurant Coalition estimates that at least 100,000 restaurants have gone out of business, and that's likely to continue. The restaurant model was sort of broken too, not your model, but the sort of, conventional restaurant model was broken. Do you see restaurants sort of following what Lighthouse has done as they rebuild and sort of restructure and address some of the terrible things that were going on in restaurants, whether it was sexual harassment, low pay, all of the things that really made the restaurant system broken?
I think that's definitely the silver lining for me in our industry from the pandemic, is that the lack of labor and the supply chain brokerage is making an industry that for a very long time did not do right by its employees, by its communities, farmers and whatnot. So I've sat on some, different conversations with other operators, and people are very infuriated by not being able to get labor force. And to be honest, I'm quite happy that they have a little bit of power in this discussion, and that they are paid higher wages, and that they are in demand. And I think that, again, kind of seeing how difficult it is to get produce and packaging and whatnot from abroad is making all of us buy more locally and really appreciate our existing systems. So I'm not happy that our industry is struggling. And it's a very painful thing to see restaurant closing and operators that I love having a hard time. But I think there could be a pivot moment where our consumers, our guests, our customers understand that the system was broken and that model wasn't working. There has been a hidden cost in a lot of our goods for a very long time. And maybe after we all recover from this. There is a new, healthier model that is better for the environment, that is better for our health system, that is better for our employees, really bringing back a little bit of the middle class. I mean, having a business in this world is like having a child. And in the same way that you want to send them to the best school and you want to see them flourish, that's how we should be thinking about our businesses. We should want them to thrive and do the best that they can and really create a better future. And, I can only hope that this time would really show all of us that that's possible and it's necessary.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we can come back to those hidden costs, I think, again, in a little while. Kate and Marcel, I want to turn to you now because Naama brought up, what I think is, the word of 2020 to 2022, which is fragility. And what we need to create is more resiliency. And I'm wondering if you can both speak to how we turn from this emergency sort of state of mind around food insecurity to one of recovery, of resilience, I'm sorry to use this phrase, of building back better, because we haven't created that model. This is, I've said this a million times at food tank events, this is not the last global shock or local shock that New York City is going to face. How do we create those recovery systems that are necessary for resilience? And I don't know, Kate, if you'd like to go first.
Sure, I'm happy to. Really appreciate my colleagues and friends here who've made such salient points, and certainly to Steinhardt and Food Tank for hosting this discussion. Beth, I'm thinking also about what you shared about your students and thinking about really getting burdened and disillusioned with the state of things. And, when I think back to the experience of the pandemic that we're still to some degree experiencing, for me, it was a moment in time when food policy became more, frankly, than just about making sure that kitchens and pantries were stocked. It became thinking about the role of restaurants. People began thinking about, the grocery stores and the workers who were driving trucks to get to the grocery stores. It became like, whoever thought words like cold storage and supply chain would be everyday vocabulary for much of the city. Thinking about, right. Of course, the restaurant sector. I think, Marcel, GrowNYC was one of the first calls I got in March, 20th of 2020 about we're here. What do we need to do? Can we continue to operate? And so the added value of that, and, being on, in my role for, I think, about 6 months at the time, but having a perch to be able to think about, this is the moment. This is the moment to not just think about feeding New Yorkers, which I'm incredibly proud of what we did, but to actually think about the more upstream commitments that we needed to make for the long haul, to make sure that our region and line of sight into the supply chains beyond even the region were created and visible for us at the city level. So now, here we are in 2022 with a mayor who is an extraordinary mayor of food. And those relationships, those abilities to think about food are never going away. So, I mean to tell you, the levels of conversation, certainly at City Hall, but across every mayor, deputy mayor portfolio, have a food centrism to them that never existed. And so when I think about your question about resiliency into the future, we need to capitalize on that. And we're looking at the federal government, we're looking at state government, and certainly our own budget to think about what do we need from a monetary, from a policy perspective, but also using those experiences of, jaw dropped, eyes wide open, thinking about the contrast of living in the times of the pandemic to crisis mentality 24/7 to now there really is this energy. There is this energy of working very long hours, but because there's just so much to do and we're so excited about doing it. So I believe that whether it is in the economic development and workforce sector, we have an extraordinary summer youth employment program blown out like it's never been conceived of before, and a real focus on making sure that there are food opportunities. I have briefed the mayor and the chancellor on a massive school food vision. And the fact that that's even discussed is just not just thinking like, what can we do, but like really thinking big about, who, Keith, you said it, like our schools are feeding 2-3 meals a day. We're looking at antiquated infrastructure to do that. You've all seen it. You've all heard what the mayor wants to do around, around the quality, and like food is health, food is wealth. That is what he says. And we know it. We wouldn't be here if we didn't know that. And so the central focus of food and food supply chains, talking with Rit and Kizzy and our climate teams, now's the moment. And I couldn't be more excited to work with all of you and your students who are disillusioned about bringing us into the next generation here.
Thank you so much, Kate. And I love that you mentioned this phrase or this term, food opportunities. That gives me hope. And I hope that gives Beth's students hope who before we started this evening, she said they were a little disillusioned. So I hope they're getting some inspiration from this conversation. Marcel, I saw you writing, scribbling notes while Kate was talking. So I know you have a lot to react to.
I just like listening to Kate.
Me too.
I was like, maybe I'm just a pie-eyed optimist about these things, but, I think for anyone who looks at food issues, both, throughout time and now, in many ways, we're at the pinnacle of human existence when it comes to the availability, access, and, easy use, availability of food. I mean, if you go back pre-industrial revolution, everyone spent their entire day figuring out either growing food, hunting food, or cooking food or preparing food. It was what you did in order to survive. So the fact that we can talk about nutrition is human.
Marcel, that's my Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah,
that's
okay,
my weekend
exactly.
warrior, Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah. I have a 15-year-old son, so me too, 7 years a day. So, but I mean, so it's good to keep these things in perspective in the sense that we're talking about issues of food insecurity, which are real and horrible for the people suffering from them. But we are not talking about mass starvation as we did, 100 years ago. And we're not talking, about, our life expectancy has gone up. If you look at every level of human existence, we've improved. Now we have a lot of work to do. And we especially have a lot to do for the folks who have been left behind in what we call, our world economy that is favoring some folks over others. Racial injustice is real, food injustice is real. Those issues need to be addressed, and they are real and they are harmful to people, but we have to stay positive about what we can do. I've worked in city government since, I started back post 9/11, back in the city council. And if someone came to me and said they want to talk about food issues, no one would have even looked at them. They would have said, well, that the private industry takes care of food in the city. Hunting delivers all our food. Why should we be talking about food? The focus was on water and, building water systems and protecting our watershed, housing, building affordable housing. And the fact that we're even having this conversation, and there are 100 and some odd people listening, is true progress when it comes to discussing food. And, I'm hopeful with this mayor, as Kate has said, who has a real focus on this, and every agency talking about these issues, that we can make real progress now. We can, raise the capital money and the expense money that we need to really build a better infrastructure. And of course, that starts with our farmers, because no discussion is, we all know where our food comes from. It comes from farms. And need to, we lose farmers every day. They're being paved over by, expansion. They're economically squeezed in many different ways. And we need to continue to invest in their livelihoods and buy from them so that they can survive and sell their wonderful product to restaurants like Lighthouse. So, but in order to get that food into the city, we need infrastructure. We need boring stuff like refrigerator warehouses and trucks and all that stuff that goes into move the food from A to B. And we need to do it in a way that is efficient and meets people's needs and gets it into communities that have been underserved for decades. Now, the last piece of that puzzle, as Keith was talking about, is people need to be able to afford that food. So
Absolutely.
we need to stop, on a global sense and a national sense, subsidizing corn and soybeans, through these massive infrastructure things that go to farmers who grow this basically sugar water that gets turned into soda that makes us all sick and, makes our kids, horribly sick, and focus on doing innovative programs like the city has created, like Health Bucks, that allow people who are receiving SNAP to have an incentive to purchase, healthy food from farmers markets and elsewhere. And that is where everyone on this call needs to come in, because you can make a difference. If there's $2 million in the farm bill to create these programs, 20 million, that's nothing when you compare billions that are going into corn and soybean subsidies. If you shift that and the arc of human history is headed that way, and invest in that federal money going to low-income individuals to buy healthy food from local farmers, then the war will be won and the conversation will be a lot different.
Well said, Marcel. There's so much to unpack there. I want to commend you for bringing farmers into this conversation. Without farmers, we wouldn't be having these discussions. And so they're the most important part of this link. I want to talk a little bit later about maybe how we can make infrastructure sexy so that people do want to talk about it. But Naama and Keith, I want to bring you back into the conversation, because Marcel said we still have so much work to do, and we have so much work to do on really important fronts. And Keith, we mentioned it before about, the policies that City Harvest is working toward, creating more justice and equality and equity and all of those things. And Naama, I know you have a lot of thoughts on how we can make our food and agriculture systems more holistic and really looking at the injustices in a way that they can be solved. And so, Keith, maybe I start with you, and you talk about some of the, what we've seen. I know many people of color have been experiencing these things for, centuries, since the beginning of the United States, right? But it's only during the pandemic, I think, where people really realized that, a lot of people really realized that racial injustice is endemic in the United States, and that it's something that needs to be solved and be solved on multiple fronts. And I'm wondering how City Harvest is approaching, creating more justice in our food systems.
It's really just advocating to people, people within city government, and just really having people look at things through a lens of equity and inclusion when it comes to the food system, and really making sure that people are involved in their own solutions. This colonial approach and helicopter approach of going into a community and deciding, particularly as I'm looking at Beth, particularly when it comes to nutrition and food education, like, this is what you should be eating. What you eat is wrong. Or maybe it's not what we eat that's wrong. Maybe it's just the way that we prepared. So that nutrition education and everything needs to meet people where they are, and then educate them from there, and not try to change everyone and have this sort of homogenized approach. But it's also having people being involved in their own food economy solution. So creating local food economies, everything from the restaurants that are there to the stores, making sure that I work a lot on good food purchasing policy. Trying to make sure that the way that our food is procured in the city is healthy, it's nutritious, but more importantly, it comes from local farmers, local producers, but also go even deeper into that, making sure that those producers and farmers are people of color and people that are from marginalized communities. So the more that people from the marginalized communities that are affected the most by the things that have happened in the past, the more that we're part of those solutions, the better off we'll be. And like high tide raises all the boats. So I'll use, for example, one of the good things that came out of the COVID crisis, once we all saw the news stories of farmers dumping milk and not knowing what to do. Once the New York City restaurants closed, most New York farmers, those were their main customers. Besides GrowNYC, those were their main customers. And they didn't know what to do with the food. So a lot of us worked with with the governor's office and the Department of Health to come up with a program called Nourish New York. And Nourish New York basically gave food banks money to buy from those local farmers. And prior to that, City Harvest it was, the times are few and far between that we could actually source directly from a local farmer. We could rescue food from the green markets, but we couldn't work directly with the local farmers. So through Nourish New York, we were able to work directly with farmers. So we advocated that that program continue beyond the pandemic, but also to increase funding and to make sure that, and we did our best trying to identify some farmers of color to work with, but the reality is that there really aren't that many who can meet the scale of a city contract or something like that. So we advocate for more support for farmers of color. And one thing for the last few years, I don't know, sometimes I feel like I'm whistling in the wind, but you can't grow black and brown farmers if you don't, you can't, what am I trying to say? You have to grow farmers to grow farming. So there needs to be more agriculture education within our schools. There needs to be, I grew up, I was a vocational agriculture student in high school, Future Farmers of America. Thought I'd be a farmer or a forest ranger. The last place I thought I'd live was New York City. And here I am today, like advocating for that. But you have to grow farmers to really grow agriculture. And whether they're black, brown, or the traditional white male, the average age of a white male farmer is like 54 or 55, and the average age of a black or brown farmer is like 57 or 60. And they're a dying breed. So we have to grow farmers if we're going to make sure that New York maintains its status as a major agricultural state. But we also have to make that agriculture more local and more hyper-local. We really need to build a robust urban agriculture program, which will create jobs within our communities. And I know our mayor speaks a lot about urban agriculture, but my message to his office has always been, it can't be in Manhattan, it can't be thinking of ways to fill those shiny new offices that no one wants to work in anymore. It has to be local. It has to be in communities like Brownsville in the South Bronx or Jamaica, Queens, where there's plenty of space for urban agriculture to grow and thrive and create jobs for the people that live there. But there also needs to be that education in schools, so there's a workforce for people to work within those urban agriculture workforces.
Thank you, Keith. Before I turn to Naama, I want to remind folks to use the Q&A function. And one of the comments in it right now is time to support local Black farmers. And the time is now. It was also, 30, 50, 100, 150 years ago. We could go on and on. But the time, if we're really committed to changing the food system, we need to support Black folks in farming. And Karen Washington of Rise and Root Farm has always told me, she's like, we don't need white folks to come in and tell us how to run our communities. We need capital and investment. That's what we need. We know how to run our communities. We know how to grow food. So Naama, you've heard a lot from Keith. I wonder if you have any thoughts on how we can make our food systems in New York more just, more fair, more accessible, more affordable.
I think the first issue or problem that I see in the system is that there's a real disconnect. We don't always realize that our food system is connected to our health system, to our economic system. And so they're all working in their singular statuses and not really talking to each other. And that is also where I see there's so much hope in technology and there's so many solutions, and we're not always talking to each other. Just before opening Lighthouse, we were exposed to the cradle to cradle philosophy, and it was really something that transformed the way that we thought about running our restaurant. Something that Willie McDonough always talks about is that the way we see sustainability right now is kind of like sustaining or doing a little less bad, rather than really creating a better future for ourselves. I look at all the different opportunities for packaging, whether we decide to go to reusables or we're looking at packaging made from seaweed or mycelium or corn, right? There's so many solutions, but if a restaurant is using compostable to-go ware, it ends up in the consumer hands, they don't really have the waste stream. It's the same to be said for recycling and what kind of energy we're using. So in order to really see things work together, I think the first step is to start connecting the dot, is really to start thinking about holistic, circular, cohesive systems where the workforce is within, and people are working together, and the solutions are actually working towards a better future. They're not just a patch or a band-aid or something that might not even be working, right? It sounds so hopeful to have all these solution and technology on our side, but unless it is connected to the community, unless it's something that is affordable for the people that are participating, it's all up in the air. And so I think the first step with the mayor's office, with all of our organizations, is to really have more conversations, to really sit down and say, let's see what these solutions will work together. Can we come up with a system? Can we even pilot something and see if that works? If that's something that gives us a long-term solution that allows more members of this of the community to participate. These water bottles that we're all seeing are wonderful, but they're expensive. $40 a bottle is not something that everyone can afford. So how can we make these solutions be very broad and really work and be cohesive and kind of talk together all the time? And I think farmers are absolutely a huge part of it. Going back to what I mentioned before about hidden costs, we're allowing the shipment and the carbon footprint of our goods coming from different places in the world, as well as the local workforce that doesn't necessarily have the jobs. We're allowing corn syrup in our food and not eating food that is healthy for us to really impact our health bill. And it's, again, this lack of connectivity that is hindering our ability to see the problems and to solve them in a way that is really forward thinking. And so just conversations and connecting things and really allowing for long-term thinking for these solutions, I think would really make the shift.
Absolutely. Kate, on that point about long-term thinking and connectivity, I know the mayor's office is interested in having these sorts of conversations like the one we're having tonight with many community members. But, long-term thinking in government is often very hard because you're thinking about the next election cycle as well. How can we make sure that these things stick around, these hopeful solutions stick around long after, a mayor has left office or a congressperson has left office?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking that question. I think it's really important. There's many ways, but I will point to two and try and weave them into the threads here. So in what Naama, you just mentioned, let's think about the ways for engagement. And Keith, you're really important, cannot be stated enough, ways about how organizations and governments are addressing racial inequities and racial injustice. So we codified a commission on racial justice at the city level, and that is something that's not going away, with a laser focus to make sure that everything that we do has a treatment and a consideration for how it can be even more just, or where are the blind spots here. My tremendous colleague, Sadia Sherman, it runs the Office of Equity under our co-deputy mayor here, Sheena Wright. From a food-centric space here, our direction of emergency food, as one example, is now weighted based on where neighborhoods that experience the most identified through our racial inclusion and equity neighborhoods. Really, I mean to tell you that every possible consideration for how to direct resources, attention, and listening, importantly, listening to communities, is happening in areas that have the most unjust systems. NYC Speaks was something that this administration carried out. I think there was something in Youth Speaks with 50,000 youth participating, and adults, but particularly I really want to emphasize the youth voice across everything from food to housing to any different type of policy spectrum was addressed in that. And we really want to continue. In fact, I was just on a call today as we're thinking about rolling out listening sessions around school food, for how to include questions also on an ongoing basis in things like NYC Speaks. So I couldn't agree more with the need to both listen and hear. I think what you raised, I've heard Karen, I adore Karen, what she, we need to listen. And I know this mayor, I've heard him say it time and time again, wants to hear from people. And he is really diligent in hearing about that to help inform the actions that he takes. So I think that's really important.
Speaking of, thank you so much, Kate. Speaking about hearing from the people, Regina Anderson from the Food Recovery Network has asked a very important question that I think Marcel may want to answer. And Regina, I don't know if you're available to come on screen and ask the question yourself. I'll just give you a minute for Elena to find you, Elena Seeley, our content director. I just think it's a really important question. And Regina, are you there? Let me see. There you are. Great. So if you want to come off mute and ask your question, that would be great. Hi, friend. You're on mute still.
There we go. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your time. Actually, Danny, I had 2 questions in the chat. So
Okay.
I had one about basically supporting Black farmers, when we know that it is Black farmers that receive the least amount of support, especially during the pandemic. A lot of the recovery dollars went to, did not go to Black farmers or farmers of color, Indigenous farmers. So there was that, just like conversations around how we as individuals can support farmers, and Black farmers in particular. But then also, Marcel was talking about, that we're growing soybeans and we're growing things that will then create sugary products. I know through Raj Patel that Danny has also interviewed before, such an awesome interview for those of you who have not listened in on that it takes a while for farmers to transition growing particular crops. So again, what does that transition look like in terms of who their customers are, as they begin to grow other crops that are more nurturing for all of us. So thanks so much, Danny.
So much, Regina. I have to commend Regina. Regina is one of our Food Tank's board members, and has been an incredible friend to Food Tank. Marcel, do you want to take some of that question on?
Yeah, clearly, it's no secret that there are only a few Black farmers in New York State and Northeast, though. And as Keith pointed out, the age of most of our farmers is pretty far, and a lot needs to be done to encourage, the creation of additional Black farmers. We at GrowNYC have a farmer training program that works with BIPOC farmers that allows them to create farm businesses to help them with that. And when they graduate from our program, if they have a working farm, Karen Washington, who was mentioned, worked through our program, started our relationship with her was back when she was a community farmer, and she's a terrific leader on these issues. And we listen to her and take her advice on this. And she's now selling at our markets, which is terrific. So we're excited about that, but a lot more work needs to be done. But we have to provide the resources, the training, and the access to the markets so that BIPOC farmers can thrive and expand. So we're hopeful that eventually, as we build out the wholesale side, a number of our BIPOC farmers can continue to expand and get larger farms and then supply the same issue that was just mentioned about in the days of the pandemic, of the large growers who we needed, who don't have a small diversified farm, but have a large, what we would call a large farm in the Northeast. So a lot of work to be done. We're dedicated to doing it and continue to work on that front. The transition, look, farmers will grow what they can sell. Farmers are business people. So if there's a market to get out of corn and soybeans, and many are trapped in that because it's a very unhealthy cycle that they're in, where they're pretty much controlled by multinational corporations who determine what seeds they plant, how it's grown, how much and what the markets are that are set by the federal government, all for the benefit of those companies and not the farmers. If we can start to provide markets for them to grow other products that, and with a focus on low-income communities by tipping the economic levers, then they will transition into that, because farmers are the most innovative people in the world. It's the oldest profession ever. So they are, they've been doing this for centuries, and they can adapt and they will change if provide markets support and really drive those levers so that they can. It's happened in the Northeast, but we have to be careful. We can't just end markets immediately, as mentioned, because then those farmers go out of business. We have to slowly transition them from one market to the next. A lot of the dairy farmers, and unfortunately, because of the milk prices and other issues and the lack of consumption, are now shifting to grow grass-fed beef. And it's important that the state and others support that transition and try and find markets for that beef. And so that's kind of what GrowNYC tries to do, both through our green markets, our wholesale, and our farmer training programs.
Thank you so much, Marcel. And this idea of a just transition is gaining sort of more momentum, that we need to really think in big ways about how we can help farmers transition and what that means for local economies and communities. And I've heard some such great words tonight that I just want to mention. The one is thrive, that keeps coming up, and the other is listening. We need to listen more so that people can thrive, and I think that's ultimately what it comes down to. I want to turn to another question in the Q&A chat from Alex Bollington, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. And I don't know if you're comfortable coming up on screen. I'll give you a second for Elena to find you. There you are. But if you'd like to go ahead and ask your question, you said it was to Keith, but also I think others on the panel can answer it as well. Alex, do you want to take yourself off mute and go ahead?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, my video is not working, but I'll just go for it. I loved, Keith, when you were talking about sort of like growing the urban agricultural movement in the city. And I know sort of like community gardens play a huge role in that, but I'm curious to hear if you have any thoughts on sort of enhancing rooftop farming across the city. Cause I work for Brooklyn Grange, and I know that that's like a very sort of like corporate rooftop farm, but I want to see more, I guess, like local rooftop farm initiatives and how we can sort of do that on a smaller scale as opposed to these huge kind of warehouse rooftop farms. And I'm just curious to see if that kind of like fits into your plan or kind of hope for sort of enhancing the urban agricultural movement across the city.
I'm definitely all for it. The more food that can be grown hyper-locally, it alleviates the need for emergency food providers, but also for people to be able to have a little bit more flexibility in their wallets when it comes to instead of going to a grocery store during the growing season. Very seldom do I buy any of my produce from a grocery store. I either go to a farmer's market or I go to a lot of the community gardens that I know, and it saves me a lot of money. But also, I know what's grown. I know the quality of it. I know how I know that it's going to be safe and organically grown. So rooftop growing, I think, will be fantastic. I think one proof of concept would be if we really had a robust plan to grow on the NYCHA roofs, the New York City Housing Authority roofs. I know it's been talked about for years, but I think that's something that this administration is also speaking about. And if we could get that going, it would be sort of, just sort of a proof of concept that it can happen with newer developments. I know a few years back, the city passed legislation that any new development, I don't know if it's over 10 stories, all of those rooftops have to be green, just for climate mitigation, as well as, just saving electricity and heating and everything. Any new development should have some type of agricultural component and connect the people in the community. If we're giving up valuable space that could be growing food for people, then the rooftops should also be used to grow food for people. I have a good friend of mine, Reverend Dr. Heber Brown, down in Maryland. He created the Black Church Food Security Network, where he's polling all of the land at Black churches, because a lot of the land ownership in the Black community in the South is through the Black church. Not so much here, but he's cataloging all of the land in the churches from Maryland all the way down to Florida and getting them to grow to scale to feed communities. It's not really something that we could probably do here, but my church had a vacant lot, and 2 years ago I started a community garden, and it's feeding that entire community. So there's a lot that can be done, a lot of innovation that can be done, but there needs to be funding behind it. Most community gardens, if they aren't part of GrowNYC or New York Restoration Project or Brooklyn Queens Land Trust, it's people like my church just putting the money in themselves. So, but there's so much that can be done with urban agriculture, rooftop or in the ground, or hydroponically, aquaponically.
Yeah, so much innovation out there. Marcel, you have your hand up.
Yeah, Kate probably can expand on this, I'm guessing, but I would say that the city has been fairly progressive over the years, trying to require affordable housing, new affordable housing that's built to include some of these gardens in it. We've worked with a number of sites, Via Verde, La Central up in the Bronx, and others to build out what we would call a community garden in the sky, which is run by the residents of the affordable housing complex, and they work as a collective to plant and grow, and they get to keep the harvest, and we train them to create a garden committee and then hand it off to them after a couple of years, and it worked fairly successfully in a number of sites, and it's I think a great model to expand.
I love that community garden in the sky. Kate, would you like to comment?
I just want to connect that to Alex's question. I don't know if everybody knows this, but legislation was passed to create a sort of sister office, if you will, to Mayor's Office of Food Policy and Mayor's Office of Urban Agriculture, and we are in the deep in the plans to launch that. So I suspect, within the next quarter that will be up and running. And yes, if you've seen the mayor talk about this, he is extraordinarily passionate about it. And I believe that the sort of articulation of urban agriculture here will be the spectrum, because it is a spectrum of everything from community gardening to rooftop farming, and particularly with a focus on the economic development angle. So thanks for that question.
Kate,
One
if we
thing,
could
Dana,
continue.
just one more thing.
Go
One
ahead.
thing that I've been really trying to do, if I could bring it back to like emergency food, one thing I've really tried to do is make a connection between the food pantries in a neighborhood and the community gardens in that neighborhood, because it's hard for City Harvest and other food banks to get lots of green leafy vegetables. But community gardens is one way that a local food pantry can have access to, especially a soup kitchen, to herbs, to green leafy vegetables, a lot of the things that they may not get from the food bank themselves, or just connecting the people that go to that food bank and say, years ago, we did these neighborhood resource guides at City Harvest. And part of there was a map that showed everywhere that you could have access to free or affordable food. And we made sure that we put community gardens in each community in there for people to, like, if I need food, instead of waiting in line at a pantry, I can go and get involved with the community garden, grow my own food, or at least go there. And we encourage a lot of the community gardens to have farm stands on Saturdays or Sundays. So it was really effective. But if the city would encourage these community growers to do that, things like connections to the water main, give them funding to have that, instead of going through garden hoses after garden hose every other week, because they're being trampled by, like the local bus. Having a connection to a water main in your garden, so you can have irrigation in your garden, or a connection to electricity. So there's a lot that can be done to really support community growing.
Absolutely. Naama, you started off by talking about connections and the need for holistic thinking. And I'm wondering if you want to build on what Keith just described.
Absolutely. Our environment in New York City is a very urban one. I think New York City, if I correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe spends $1.5 billion a year on our waste removal and our waterways. And there are just so many ways that We're seeing the toxicity and the impact of our busy lives and on our environment. And so I think really looking at these different solutions and putting them together is crucial. Going back to what Keith said, these rooftop gardens will improve our waterways, right? Less pollution, just greenify everything, creating more healthy food for all these communities. So, this is exactly what I think we need to kind of like see happening is connecting all these dots, localizing all of our food productions and our trafficking systems and whatnot. And what GrowNYC did for restaurants and buyers, I can say as someone that uses GrowNYC, it made it possible for us to buy large quantities from farmers that are, otherwise I can't just necessarily carry things or have to use a vehicle. So it just really that kind of like centralization and also removing some of the responsibility from farmers, from small businesses, from the consumers. We've sort of gotten used to the idea that this is all our responsibility and that we have the power and the end all to solve the entire problem. And it really is impossible. Our power as individuals, our power as small businesses is very marginal. And so we need to work with each other. We need to work with the city and create a little bit more responsibility on the higher forces that are kind of driving all of these things. Another thing is to start it much earlier. I think if we're going back to schools, kids that are growing up and not eating great food, eating a lot of processed food and sugary foods, are not developing to be critical thinking or are not developing to have the ability to differentiate between healthy, fresh, good food that is nourishing to your body versus something that, they might have grown up with in their educations or in their own for lack of better options. And, when they reach the age of 18 and 20 and they're starting to make their own choices, unless we kind of interfere a little bit earlier, we can't really expect anything to change. So it's again, I think that the problem is very wide. And I think the solution is really almost a philosophical one. It's really a transition to seeing things holistically, to really look at the bigger issues and kind of like uproot a lot of the issues that we're seeing globally from that shift from localized, from our mothers cooking from us, from chef cooking for us, to seeing food being made in labs, and really bringing things back home and to a healthier economy and using our farmers. And it's really just
Sure.
a very simple transition.
Sure. I think this idea of localizing and regionalizing our food systems is a very important one as we experience these global shocks. But what I like about this group of panelists is you've made all of these really important connections. We didn't get into some of the things that I'm really excited about, which are nerdy, like procurement and infrastructure, but maybe we can have a follow-up panel on that. But I want to thank all of you for really making this a lively discussion and going back to the hope and the inspiration and the success stories that are out there. And I'd like to bring Beth Weissman back into the fold here. And Beth, this has been so great. I've learned so much, and I feel inspired, and I hope your students do.
Yeah, I keep thinking of that quote that I think is Winston Churchill, but never let a good crisis go to waste. And I think, Kate, you started us off there, and I've just been hearing so many fabulous ideas of how we can move forward by not letting this crisis go to waste. So thank you all. It's been terrific.
Thank you all so much. This has been a great panel. I want to thank everyone who watched online. We can make this available on foodtank.com for those of you who weren't able to join. But thank you, Marcel, Kate, Keith, and Naama, and of course, Beth. This has been a wonderful event. Thanks for helping partner with Food Tank. I'm just so pleased with all of this great work that's being done and excited about how New York can serve as an example for other cities as well. Thanks, everyone.
Good night, everyone. It's been great.
Thank you. Good night.